right, it looks like about half of folks are here now, so I think we can kick off and people can trickle in as time goes on. But welcome everyone. Really excited to have everyone here today, and very grateful to have Ashley Brandau here with us today as a supply chain and production expert. Really why we wanted to host this event today was we at Blue Onion were hearing a lot from our customers and our network around all the uncertainties with tariffs this spring into early summer and now into last week. And so wanted to bring a group together with expertise from Ashley to be able to ask questions of, okay, what was announced last week? And then what are the implications for e-commerce teams and for accounting teams in particular? So I think we have some larger enterprise companies on, we have some more mid-market and SMB, which is great because that's Ashley's expertise. She helps startups with scaling and also some of these bigger brands, having worked at Gap and Minnow Swim and some really fantastic companies. So a little bit of housekeeping today, just as we get started. We'd love to treat this like a true Q&A panel. So we don't have structured slides to go through. We really want to turn it over to you all to bring your questions for Ashley. And as part of your registration, a lot of you submitted kind of your top question around tariffs. So we'll kick things off with a few of those common threads that were presented as you registered, but would encourage folks to come off mute and give some context on your business and describe your situation to Ashley and the impact of the tariffs for you and get that advice in real time, or of course leverage the chat feature, which we will monitor for the 45 minutes and make sure to get your questions answered. There will be a recording sent out tomorrow morning, so you can expect that, and we'll include a link to Ashley's LinkedIn profile and her email as well. So if you're interested in working with her, having further conversations around this, you'll have her information as a follow-up too. But with that, welcome everyone to our conversation today. And I'll turn it over to Ashley and Lyndsey, our co-founder and CEO, to give a little bit of background beyond what I shared before we dive into some questions.
Great. Lyndsey, you go first.
Yeah. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for being here, and thanks so much for everybody for joining. Great to see some familiar names in the Zoom as well. So great to see everybody. My name is Lyndsey. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Blue Onion. So as I know a few of you on the call already know, so we are the leading clean financial data platform built specifically for e-commerce and retail companies. And so we work with mid-market companies and also publicly traded companies, sort of everything in between, to help support their finance and accounting teams to really deliver clean, reconciled, precise financial data. So super excited to have this call today, just in a lot of our conversations. And I know what really has been top of mind for many of you, really on the tariffs. So excited to be able to bring somebody that has such incredible and deep expertise to the call. And so hope that, you guys will also chime in with any questions that you have specific to your business, hoping to make this, as Courtney mentioned, as interactive as possible. Cool.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here today. I am Ashley Brandau. I've worked in production for 15 years now, which is crazy to say. Was with Gap Inc. for almost 10 years, with Banana Republic Factory Store and Athleta. Worked for Minnow, which was a children's swimwear brand that was doing mostly domestic production when I first started, and helped them scale overseas and grow the business by over 300%. From there, started working with Solid and Striped, Kilty, a women's sweater brand, consulting for Cadets, which is a children's and men's brand, working for Alice Walk, which is a contemporary women's brand, and consulting for a few other brands doing product development and production. But excited to talk about supply chain and everything that we're navigating right now with tariffs.
Awesome. Thank you both. Hopefully for some of our customers on the call, you already know Lyndsey too. So another friendly face to have here. But Ashley, I think one of the questions we got as part of the registration, and I think is a good place to probably start, is twofold. One, what is a tariff? How do you define that? And two, what was announced, right? Like kind of recapping or breaking down the changes that were announced last week, I think is probably a good starting point before we dive into specific use cases.
Yeah. So let's start with tariffs. So tariff is a tax that is levied by the government to help control imports and exports, and really is a tax to help build out domestic production and regulate everything that is going on. Separate of that are duty percentages, which are implemented too, but we'll focus today specifically on tariffs. And I am going to pull up the notes because, as we know, this is changing on a daily basis, so I don't want to misspeak here. So as we know, President Trump issued a new executive order changing most of the tariffs that he had announced earlier this year. Canada is now at 35%, which is higher than we expected. Brazil is now at 50%, which was a pretty big shock. Switzerland is at 39%, South Africa 30%, Syria 41%, EU 15%. Taiwan and Vietnam 20%, Japan, South Korea, Israel, Iceland 15%, India 25%, but I did see there are conversations going on as of today that may change too. And then China is still TBD based on the conversations. They're currently at 37.5%, but earlier in the year they were at 135%, so that is changing daily. And then Thailand, Cambodia are at 19%, Bangladesh is at 20%, and Myanmar is at 40%. So as of today, that is where we are, and we sadly don't know what is going to happen in the next few months, but monitoring closely. Another one that I forgot to mention is Mexico, which is a 90-day pause. So
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we in prepping for this event, it was different information a month ago, right? And so yeah, as of today, that's where we stand, which I think is helpful to level set. And you were hinting at it, Ashley, but one question we got to was like, are these permanent? Do you expect these to be long term? And as we've seen, this is a bit unpredictable, but what's your outlook on that?
So I think based on looking at the last 7 months, it's hard to predict, as you mentioned, but I do think that tariffs are here to stay. Do we know what those exact percentages are going to be? No, we don't. But I think it's important to plan based on where they currently are and to expect the highest situation. And then even if they get reduced, you now have complete control and optimization of your fiscal books.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Yeah, I think we got a few of those questions actually, which is like,
Yeah.
how do you expect this to change over the next 3.5 years? So I think the key message is anticipate change. We'll see what happens to the extent of what degree of change.
Yeah, and as I was saying earlier, I mean, again, count for the highest and figure out ways to start negotiating costs. And even if that does come down, then you do end up with a better margin. And I do think it's a good time to reassess business and really break down costs and see where there are opportunities to save, whether it's in the cost of goods or looking at freight, or looking at how to become more strategic with your inventory.
Yeah. Yeah, that gets at a big theme in the questions that were submitted too, which is like, how do you plan for the costs with all of the uncertainty around these tariffs?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of different things that you can look at. So it depends on what terms you have. If you are FOB, I think it's really important to look at your costs and understand what's going into your costs. Normally, it's raw materials, it's cut and make costs, it's trim costs. But there are a lot of costs that sometimes might be taken into account into that FOB that you're not aware of. Most recently, a few weeks ago, I was working with one of my clients and we learned that courier costs of just shipping samples back and forth was included in those FOBs, as well as development costs like opening a mold or design support and things like that. And we were able to take some of that out and see a 15% savings as a result there. Separate of that, I think it's a good time to negotiate, depending on what you're working with, the base goods, really working with your suppliers and mills to negotiate those and lock in a price for a year or so. And that might require paying a deposit up front, but you will see that savings by drawing down and having that price locked in. And then, as I was mentioning as well, I think looking at freight too, I think because we are such a reactionary culture, people have been shipping things so quickly, but really slowing down and figuring out, can you ship by sea? Could you split ship? And then obviously the implementation of bonded warehouses here. And is that an option and a path to go down as well?
Actually, can you
Really,
talk a little bit more about like bonded warehouses, what that means for
Yes. So there are two different paths. So there are bonded warehouses, which I have this written down because I didn't want to misspeak, 1,751 bonded warehouses in the US right now. And then there are foreign trade zones, which are 2,240 foreign trade zones in the US. So the bonded warehouses is a storage facility located near airports and different ports. And that is a way to ship freight directly to the bonded warehouse where it comes in duty free. They can hold it up to 5 years, and you can release it if a lower duty rate comes through. You can then release those goods. While it sounds great and it might be great, it might not be the right option because you are paying for transportation from the factory to the bonded warehouse and then paying for transportation again from the bonded warehouse to your own warehouse or distribution center. And you're also taking a risk because we don't really know what's going to happen with the tariffs. Foreign trade zone used to be similar, but those just changed. You can keep your product there for as long as you want. You used to have the ability to release it at the lower duty rate, but President Trump has just initiated the privileged foreign status, which means that the duty rate is locked in at the time of the privileged foreign status. So you might not have access or the capability to release it at a lower duty rate.
Good question, Lyndsey. I was wondering that.
Yeah. And I actually had first learned about it because there are bonded warehouses in foreign countries, and we found workarounds by shipping even yarn within China to avoid paying the Chinese local tax and things like that. And I do think it's beneficial from a cash flow perspective because you're not paying those duties immediately. And there's the opportunity to potentially pre-sale items to have the cash to be able to pay for those duties, which is great for smaller brands. But then again, you're taking the risk of not knowing where tariffs are going to actualize.
Yep. Related to that, Ashley, and maybe zooming out a little bit, what other changes could folks expect related to the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, as we saw during COVID, it is important to not disrupt the supply chain. We can all see the downward spiral as a result of disrupting that. I think in the beginning of all these tariffs, people were really reactionary, particularly with China and trying to migrate out of China and moving to other countries. But that might not be the right decision for your business. As we've seen with diversifying with countries of origin and moving to other countries, they might not have the capabilities or the infrastructure to be able to support what you're doing. So I think it's important to be smart about making those decisions and migrating to new factories. I think too, because of that as well, capacity is definitely filling up with a lot of these factories in some of these other countries with lower tariff rates. So I think you're going to have to start getting really strategic about your planning and making sure that you're booking capacity far enough out to lock that in and achieve the X factory date needed.
Really great advice. Another question that has come up, unless I'm going to give folks maybe an opportunity to jump in here if anyone would like to. Okay, I'll dive into the next queued up question I have from registrants. I thought this was a really good question. So, what are the levers we can pull and we should be aware of before placing a PO, after placing a PO, and even when the delivery is in process?
Yeah, so I think there are a bunch of different factors here. One thing that was a big initiative of mine at Athleta, which I know Janelle is aware of, was focusing on responsive supply chain. So I think it's getting really strategic about demand-driven buying. So reserving that capacity, reserving those raw materials, and then working closely with the factories to have trigger dates closer to market so you can get a better read on business and react. So for instance, I worked on knit tops. We had a 17-week pipeline with 70% of the assortment on that and a 30-week or 30% on a 4-week pipeline. And it gave us color, size, and style flexibility. So I think that that's a really strategic way to work because rather than having just inventory, you have the right inventory that you know you're going to move through. I think an issue right now is so many brands are sitting on aged inventory and trying to figure out how to work through that and also needing the cash flow to be able to buy new product or reorder product that's working for their brand.
Oh, great, very helpful. With the, you work with a lot of different brands, like you've mentioned. It's, what is the feedback they've received from their customers when implementing maybe some changes to their cost strategy?
So the brands that I'm currently working with haven't raised their retails yet. They will be doing so in Q4. I think, again, the overall theme, these are unprecedented times. We don't really know what's happening with the tariffs. So they have been less inclined to react and more inclined to wait and really understand the situation. So I think more people will be raising their retails come Q4. I think the biggest thing that I feel is being transparent with the customer. I know that there have been some brands who have outlined tariff costs in the prices so people have visibility to that. I think other ways to do it are find more incentives to keep the customer. Is it offering free shipping? Is it offering 10%? Or is it providing visibility that you're going to be raising your retails in 30 to 60 days so they, not as a fire sale, but they're more inclined to purchase before prices go up?
Yeah. That's great. That was another question we got, which is like, what's the best way to communicate the change to customers without detrimenting or damaging your brand loyalty? So transparency being key there.
I think, as all brands can attest to, brand loyalty is the most important thing. So I think transparency is the best. I also think transparency is the best with your strategic factories and partners. I find the most successful relationships that I have are the ones where I'm transparent about what my needs are.
Yep, totally. And Lyndsey, from your perspective, any conversations you had with our clients at Blue Onion, or even folks in your network too, of how they're going about the impact to customers and communicating that.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ashley. I think for the most part, everyone was still in this wait and see mode a little bit. So, in terms of what that meant for customers, to Ashley's point, I think holiday will be a really interesting time, right? When demand is high, anyways. And now, right, like, or hopefully, I think people are hoping on some clarity at this point for what some of the tariffs mean. So, we haven't seen, at least from our existing customers, a ton of changes quite yet in terms of the consumer prices.
Yeah, great. I'm just giving an opportunity for anyone who wants to speak up here. If you would like to ask Ashley or Lyndsey anything specific, otherwise I'll keep cruising through.
Yeah, Courtney, I actually have a question for Ashley because I know when we had talked about this, I think maybe actually like maybe a month or two ago too, right? Like where I think when the tariffs happened, everyone went into this like pure panic mode, right? Of just like, how do I move production from, this country to that country? And, people got on flights and trying to figure out what to do. I think, some of that has settled a little bit. And I think also, again, just talking to a few folks, obviously, I think that entailed much more than they were really prepared to do. So in the case where, okay, we have hopefully we'll have a little bit of clarity of like what this means, at least for like the next, several months, maybe years. I guess what would your advice be, right? Of just like, okay, here's, I have production in China today. Should I try and negotiate with my existing factory? Across the supply chain? Should like how like where should I begin? Because I think some of that can feel pretty overwhelming to folks too.
Yeah, I think you start with negotiating with your current supplier to see where you can get. I think, again, there are so many factors that go into that cost. First, right, is something that some of the factories are doing. As I mentioned earlier, there are other costs that have been going into FOBs that need to be separated out. So, working to separate those invoices to have a development invoice and then an invoice that's true cost of goods. So, you're only getting taxed on your actual raw materials in the finished product. So I think starting there and seeing if there's opportunity there. A lot of these Chinese factories have factory locations in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and other countries of origin too. So I think it's important to understand if your strategic partner has that capability to migrate that elsewhere. And I do think it's important too to counter source with some of the other factories. I think what we've seen is even with China, despite having a 37.5% tariff, if we were to move that to domestic production and produce it here in LA, it would still be more expensive to produce it in LA than it is to finish the product in China and ship it to the US by sea and pay a 37.5% tariff on top of the product duty percentage as well.
Yeah, and maybe that's it. That's actually just a call out, like in terms of the FOB and like splitting the invoices. Like that is actually incredibly interesting, right? Because I think, a lot of folks on this call too are we're the ones that are like looking at the invoices, like working with supply chain in terms of, what is cost of goods sold. But that actually is like I've never heard that before, of just like, hey, maybe it makes sense to like split it out by type. Do we need to have everything that we're producing in that country, right? Like, as opposed to thinking about like, are there other things like we should actually potentially be doing in the US?
Yeah, and I think there are other factors too. I mean, from an efficiency standpoint at the factory, it makes more sense to produce everything at once. So, do you produce everything at once and then split ship and ask the factory to sit on the inventory? A lot of my partners have been doing that. We've been asking them to hold the product for 3 months and shipping the product as we need. Do we pay a deposit on that? Yes, but we're not paying the full payment there. So that's one option. And then another thing too is relooking at payment terms with your factories. It used to be 100% net 30 days. I feel like a lot of factories have required an upfront deposit, but is there any way to move to 3 deposits to help with cash flow so you're not getting hit with the duty percentage or 100% at net 30 days?
Related to that, Ashley, is there, for like the more finance accounting folks on this call, is there like a common panic move that you see finance teams potentially make that maybe in the long run ends up becoming more costly for them?
Yeah, I think again, there people have been reacting and just bulk ordering and sitting on a lot of inventory, and you want to make sure you're sitting on the right inventory. Yes, you need inventory to sell, but if you're sitting on aged inventory that's going to take 16 months to move through, that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ashley, I
Okay.
have a question. Speaking of inventory disruptions, the last time I like remember this being so big was during COVID. Is this similar level of disruption? Are we in a whole different playing field now?
I feel like it's different. I feel like COVID, because it was locked down, everybody was trying to get out of inventory. So they were releasing capacity, reducing units because they were scared to be sitting on so much inventory. I don't think people are necessarily cutting back buys yet because, again, the consumer hasn't seen those increases in retails. We might be doing that 3 months from now. I think this is more focusing on country of origin and where you're producing, diversifying that more, and then really relooking at costing and seeing where you can find savings.
Actually, does it make sense in any world? So when I was in Birchbox, we used to have an in-house brand. And so we would get all of the different components, we would ship them to the US, and we would actually do like the packaging and the assembly directly in the US. Does that like have you seen that make sense for anyone, I guess, like in terms of like thinking about like what you're actually importing, or is just at this point like the labor cost differential just so great that it's like really hard math to do?
Hard math to do, and now we're getting charged on materials that are imported in too. So
Yeah.
it's not as easy as it used to be. And I know, like with de minimis going away too, all the loopholes that we used to have by doing stuff stateside or doing it in Mexico are no longer viable. So
Ashley, you answered this somewhat already, but I want to just ask it more directly to give you opportunity to answer it directly. The question was, do you foresee shifts in how brands leverage 3PLs or bonded warehouses in response to these tariffs? And related, are there strategies for smaller brands to adopt to stay agile in their fulfillment while minimizing their duty exposure?
yeah, I actually have never used a bonded warehouse. I do think that it is a great thing, but again, there's risk associated with that because we don't have any visibility into what the tariff situation is going to be. I do think it's worth looking into and figuring out the math behind it, and understanding what the costs are to ship to the bonded warehouse and then to ship from the bonded warehouse to your warehouse to see if it makes sense. I do think, yeah, leveraging 3PLs makes a lot of sense. But as I was mentioning earlier, I think it's more focusing on how you're shipping inventory. Again, I'm doing a lot of split shipping, and we're seeing that even if we have 100% sell through rate, we would rather have that and miss those sales opportunities versus sitting on inventory that we're not moving through, that then again, we don't have the cash flow to be able to support buying new product.
Ashley, I have a question regarding what you said about consumers. So they're not kind of feeling the price tag yet. Can you just talk a little bit about what that will look like in 2, 3 months when consumers start feeling the brunt? And like, what does that mean for finance teams with forecasting and margins, etc.?
Yeah, so more specifically, my brands haven't increased the retails that I've been working with. I know that some people have taken that into account and are listing it as a line item when you're checking out. But I think it really depends on the size of the business. I mean, for short term, potentially 10 to 40% increase to some of these things, depending on the country of origin, in 3.5 years, I think to expect the same. Again, some of the lower price point consumers, they're probably not going to raise their retails as much, so they're going to have to take a slight hit. But with some of these higher end brands that have brand loyalty and brand recognition, I think that they will be able to increase their retails by potentially 70 to 100%. I think it's really, yeah.
Wow. Mm.
Ashley, country specific question here, and I think we had chatted about this in a prior call we'd had with the Blue Onion team, but what are your thoughts on leveraging Vietnam as a secondary sourcing support with the increasing regulations on specifically raw materials from China?
Yeah, so I have been producing a lot of things out of Vietnam recently. I would say if you had asked me 6 months ago, I would say that they did not have the same capabilities that China had, but I feel like there have been so many investments that have gone into getting Vietnam up to speed. I do feel like there are a lot of fabric mills that are going in that are now able to replicate what was being produced in China, and you are able to find everything locally there now, which is great because they're now saying even if you're producing Vietnam and importing Chinese fabric, you're still going to have to pay taxes on that. So it is very exciting to see that Vietnam is a viable option and does have most of the capabilities that China does.
Yeah, great.
Maybe switching gears a little bit. Like I know this is about tariffs, but maybe just a question of just like thinking in terms of, what advice could you give to companies that, the tariffs are here, they are what they are, right? But maybe other things that they could do to help offset the increased cost of goods sold. Whether I know you had mentioned some logistics things, is there anything else that like comes to mind or that you've seen and advised other companies to take a look at to potentially help offset, some of the tariff cost?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think getting strategic with demand-driven buying and figuring out other ways to move through inventory and set that up is a huge thing. I think that, yeah, I just lost my train of thought of what I was going to say next. But yeah, I think that that's a huge thing. And again, I think just really breaking down what you're doing and seeing where there are opportunities. Freight's a huge thing that I feel like a lot of people don't focus on.
Yeah.
I think historically, air has been 7 to 10 days from Asia to the US. Sea has always been 30 to 35 days, but there are now fast boats leaving from China that can get from Shanghai to LA in 15 days. And you go from a $4 per kilo to about $1 per kilo. So I think there are a lot of things within that that you can look at as well.
I didn't know that about the faster boats. That's actually because I remember, also during COVID too, right? Of just like how do we get stuff as quickly as possible? That really starts to shorten the period that something is in transit.
Yeah. And I think people need to be more strategic about that too, because capacity is booking up quickly with a lot of these different places, especially as people try to move inventory out before some of these tariffs hit.
And actually, how many days in advance are people like looking to, because you also mentioned some deposits in terms of like holding capacity at the factory, right? Like holding raw materials, like, I guess, what have you seen? Like, I guess what makes sense in terms of timeline of trying to book some of these things out for the future?
Yeah, in terms of payment terms, I think 30% deposit at PO is normal. A lot of factories who are working with you for the first time will try to push for 50%, but I think 30% is reasonable. 70% at X Factory can be a huge hit to the cash flow. So I think I personally like going with 3 deposits. You can do another 30% potentially at X Factory and then do the remaining percentage either net 45 days, just to help and offset that.
And you mentioned something before this call too, just in terms of like the negotiating leverage, right? Like, so maybe it would love for you to maybe share like what you're seeing, you know, as you talk to different factories, you know, over in China as an example of just like, do you feel like we can come in and be like, okay, here are terms, like you need like we need you for production, but you also need us, or do you feel like things have been changing in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, as I was saying to you guys earlier, I feel like partnership is the most important part here. I think if you're transparent with the factories about your needs, they're willing to work with you. I've seen a few customers be quite abrasive in terms of saying, how are you going to cover the 20% tariff? I need you guys to match that. But instead, working together and finding ways to mitigate that. Again, the first ask, as I was mentioning earlier, separating the invoices, factories can partner with you on that. But I think it's really important to work together because that's the only way you're going to get these negotiations. Otherwise, they're not going to partner with you go forward. And I was mentioning earlier too, some of these China factories are now focused more on domestic production, and they've found ways to replace US production and aren't necessarily going to take us back, even if tariffs get reduced. So it's important to maintain those relationships and build that trust and transparency.
Have you seen any, like, does it make sense to make anything in the United States? Like, is there any sort of cat, right? Like, or there's like some sort of competitive advantage, just like really curious, like if there's like, yeah, I don't know if there's anything, even with the tariffs today.
I can only speak from an apparel perspective domestically. I did a lot of domestic production while I was at Minnow. Um, what we take for granted overseas is the vertical production there, that they are overseeing everything. Whereas here in LA, it's not a vertical operation. You're working with a fabric supplier, you're working with a cutter, you're working with a pattern maker, you're working with a sewer. There's so many variables involved that it's just incredibly expensive. I think another big thing too is we just don't really have the infrastructure for apparel production to scale the way that we are overseas. Machinery specifically, we just don't have the quality and innovation that they do. And more importantly, the workforce to manage these jobs. I did domestic production a couple months ago with cadets. We had delivery delays every single time. We migrated everything overseas and are seeing 40% savings. So it was just really hard to justify domestic production. I do know there are some LA-based brands that have set up successful factories over here and it works for them. But again, I think it depends on the size and the product.
Great questions, Lyndsey. Thanks. This has been fantastic, Ashley. I just want to give folks, a final opportunity as we get to the end here to either throw questions in the chat or come off mute and share before we have some closing thoughts. All right, no worries. I get it. Ashley, I guess just to like round things out, from the clients you're working with, from your experience with supply chain disruptions, is there any positivity or hope that you can distill from your 14 years of experience kind of handling these types of changes as for the folks on the line here, maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed by what's been announced?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've worked with probably 15 different countries of origin at this point. There are always going to be things that happen, but if you find the right partner and you invest in that partnership, I think you can make anything happen. I've taken a factory that I worked with at a Gap and utilized them at these small startups. And the only reason they were working with the small startups is because of my history with them. So value those partnerships, take the time to understand their operation, take the time to understand your costing and where there are opportunities. And again, there is no right answer right now. I think we're all trying to navigate this and figure out what works best for your business. But there are opportunities and there are ways to successfully produce things and mitigate some of the tariffs.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Ashley, for joining us, and thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Janelle, for the comment. We will be, like I said, sharing the recording tomorrow, and we'll link out to Ashley's LinkedIn and her email. So if folks are interested in connecting with her, working with her directly, obviously highly recommend. And yeah, thanks so much for joining. You can also subscribe to Lindsay's newsletter for other future events that Blue Onion will be hosting around similar trending topics for folks in the e-commerce space. So look forward to seeing you at the next one.